And thank you very much for joining us here on PM Express. My guest is a man who rarely speaks, but you hear him in the chamber. That's where he's plied his trade for so long, and I'm delighted that he gets to sit with us for a conversation about this parliament. You would agree, this parliament is a very unique one indeed, and because of its uniqueness, has thrown up several challenges. Some have said Ghana's democracy is better for it, because after this parliament is done, a lot will possibly shape the way our democracy is done, governed, the way we practice it going forward. And it's really at the heart of doing that. Suffice to say that his attempt to, shape that whole conversation about how the democracy and the parliament is concerned going forward has landed him in some, call it controversy, pitching him, some say, looking from outside against the speaker himself, Alban Bagbin. At least that's how we who see it from outside, that is how we perceive it. Is that so? You possibly would have guessed by now who I'm talking about. He is the first Deputy Speaker of Parliament, Joe Osei Owusu. He's a Member of Parliament for Bekwai. He's my guest on PM Express. Thank you very much, Osei Owusu.
A pleasure, sir.
I start by talking about how we perceive it. Non-parliamentarians watching from afar, that it appears there's this tension between yourself and Alban Bagbin, the speaker. Is that an accurate perception?
Well, I'm not sure whether I will call it tension.
Okay.
But it's probably something unusual that we should be discussing our differences before the media, because we have other avenues for discussing even where we disagree. But unfortunately, we have had to do it before the media, which probably should not be the case. But I think between us, we understand that these things are not personal. And so I would rather say that our differences are playing out in the public gallery rather than at a forum where we probably ought to. But I don't see tension.
The speaker last week, in describing a decision that you took while you were acting as unconstitutional and offensive. And he was talking about what he said then to be your penchant to overrule his decisions. In this case, he believed you had overturned a decision to admit a motion for the setting up of a bipartisan committee of inquiry. You agree that your action then, first of all, constituted overturning the Speaker's earlier decision and hence unconstitutional and offensive?
Well, as I pointed out in my statement, first, the power to admit a motion or not is administrative. And the Speaker does not share that power with anybody. So the decision to admit or not to admit a motion, the application is sent to Mr. Speaker, and then he will decide, one, I've admitted it, or two, kindly amend A, B, or C. If you do that, he will admit it. Or three, I've rejected it. The rule is that if he rejects it, he returns it to the applicant. Right. As soon as the Speaker takes a decision on that, then it is forwarded to the table office if it is admitted, and then to the business committee, which will then program it. My view is that the process of admitting the question at that point is completed. So there's no occasion for that to be overturned. So, indeed, the Speaker admitted a motion. That motion came before the House. On the floor of the House, though, it is the House that takes decisions on any matter before it. And once it came into the House, a member, any member, was entitled to raise issues with it. This is what happened. On Tuesday, Mr. Speaker started, but before he left the seat for me, the Honorable Deputy Majority Leader had raised issues with the motion he had already admitted.
Okay, was it on the question of admissibility?
I don't
or
think
the
it's
legality of
the
it?
legality or propriety of the motion. The Speaker heard him and actually directed at what point he should continue with his objection. That was when he left the seat for me. Indeed, what I heard, and I thought I had heard right, was that after the motion had been seconded, he can move his objection. But reading the statement he issued the day after, he rather said, after the motion had been moved, but before it had been seconded. Right. However be it, there's no dispute that Mr. Speaker actually heard the application to challenge the motion, and he actually directed what time, at what point it should be heard. Now, once that motion was admitted, it was argued by both sides. The person presiding had no choice but to make a ruling. That is where I differ with Mr. Speaker, that the ruling I made constituted an overturning of the motion he had earlier agreed. I beg to differ. He may have ruled differently if he was the one in the seat. But listening to both sides, and I can say that the person who moved the motion and the two persons who spoke after or in support of the motion demonstrated to me, referencing the Constitution and the budget, to show that the things they were asking for were actually provided for under the law. So the conclusion I came to was that there's a rule in our standing orders guiding at what point or in what circumstances we can set a special committee. And it does not fit into the rule, since the committee they are asking for, both in terms of character and content, there was one existing already. The Public Accounts Committee is chaired by the minority. And indeed, its main function is to look at the Auditor General's report of public accounts. So if the committee wanted to, while waiting for public accounts, to go into any investigation on its own, our rules permit the committee to do that. And therefore, there was no point in setting up another committee of the same character to do the same thing that the committee. That was my conclusion.
I remember listening to you that day, and in your conclusion on your ruling, you said you rule and this motion should not have been admitted in the first place.
No, what I said from the beginning, that the motion appears to suggest that this motion ought not to have been admitted. That was just to admit what was the basis for the motion before me. But in ruling, I relied on Order 191.
We'll come to Order 191, but there's something you said in your statement which you've touched on, that I hold the view, however, that once the motion has been advertised on the order paper and placed before the House, a member is entitled to raise an objection to question its legality or otherwise. Yes. But doesn't the admission and advertisement suggest that the Speaker had concluded that there was no illegality or otherwise with it, and that's why he would have admitted it?
Yes, but it doesn't mean that you are the final say. When on the floor of the House,
but he has the final say. The Speaker does.
No, admitting it, but deciding whether or not you should continue or not, the members also have a say. Otherwise, he wouldn't have admitted that the deputy leader should move the motion.
But if that's the case, then it really amounts to overturning his decision.
No, the decision to admit or not is concluded. That, I say, is administrative.
But inherent in that decision is his assertion that I'm confident that there's no legal questions yet. Subsequent to that, the legal questions are raised.
You see.
And then you say, well, I agree now that there are legal questions. But the Speaker substantively have said, in admitting it, that he doesn't see the problem.
That doesn't necessarily say so. He may not have considered all the sides. And that is the whole essence of a review. If you go to court, objection.
Yeah.
Right. When you, for my practice, when you raise an objection to something, you're suggesting that there's some legal or technical challenge to the thing. And as long as it is a right of a member to raise it, whenever any such issue is raised, the person presiding, whether it's the Speaker himself, any of his deputies, or a member, he would have to rule. how I rule should not be that I would have ruled A or B. So if you rule C, then it means you're offending me. That's why I part ways with Mr. Speaker.
Some may say that position of yours creates a recipe for chaos and a setting division of the speakership in terms of your front is broken. It definitely doesn't. In terms of the effect of what you're saying is, regardless of his decision, if tomorrow you're sitting, somebody raises a question on what has already been decided, you are entitled to also consider and rule based on how you interpret the Constitution and standing orders.
Yes.
That creates a problem, doesn't
It
it?
shouldn't. Unless we decide that all issues relating to motion should be deferred for Mr. Speaker to deal with.
In fact, that's his position. He gave a position on this, elaborating on the back of the budget controversy. And he said from other jurisdictions that once he had done it, it's only he who can preside. In fact, you should defer that decision to him because you said, he quoted, that you are not the speaker.
But that's a challenge. There are the positions, the speaker, and then there's the presiding officer. At any point that I preside, I hold the same powers and apply the same rules as the speaker himself. But the position of the speaker is different from the position of the deputy speaker. I'm emphatic on that because the deputy speakers are members of parliament. And so, in addition to being deputy speakers, we also have the responsibility of members. And frankly, if you look at the Constitution intended that deputy speakers should come from the divides of the House. So it is not expected that the deputy speakers will be different from other members of the House. Right. But the point I'm making is, if what he's saying is true, it should reflect in the standing orders. He says, I've listened to him, that he has read from other jurisdictions and so on. And he keeps saying that this parliament is unique. It's not like any parliament anywhere else. So those jurisdictions, what they do there is based on their rules and their practice. Right. We use we call it, forgotten the name, I have a copy here, to guide us. It's based on the practice of the English parliaments. So everything in there that is in accord with our own rules. But the practice, how our members are expected to behave and things like that, we can take a leaf from what they do elsewhere. Particularly in areas where it's not specifically provided for in our Constitution or in our standing orders. Then you may borrow from elsewhere. But I'm not aware that there's any suggestion in any of our standing orders that because something started by one speaker, then only he or she. That is likely, if we accept that interpretation, business of the House is likely to stall.
I mean, this is the question, I guess, that governance people will ask you. If your interpretation of this is what it is, are you saying that you are prepared to overturn a Bambabin decision so far as your interpretation of the standing orders and the Constitution differs from his, regardless of whether he's already presided over the subject before?
If Mr. Speaker has interpreted or ruled on something, it can only come back to me by a formal motion.
True.
Right? So I've said that no such application has ever been made to me.
But the principle you are pushing suggests that if that scenario plays out, you would rule based on your interpretation of the Constitution, and that may lead to overturning his decision.
Well, I don't know how you call those overturn. First thing is that when it comes to rulings, it deals with the situation. And when it is done, it's over. Unless there's a specific application. But I'm saying that if Mr. Speaker, for example, makes a ruling and a member challenges that, I would not have the power to deal with that because it would be a formal motion and it would have to go to him.
That's an interesting proposition. Why? Because in this instance that we are talking about, the Speaker in that day when he chastised you also actually gave a hint, in fact, advised the processes to undo what you've done in that same sitting. Subsequent to that, I've spoken to Dr. Kisatofose, whose motion it was, who says he's formally going to challenge what you've done. Are you suggesting then, based on what you just said, that that challenge should come to you and not to the Speaker?
No, I'm saying to go to him. Once it's a decision challenging the Speaker's ruling.
No, it's a decision challenging your decision.
No, the person presiding, at any point in time, any ruling on the person presiding, if you challenge it, it's a formal motion, and it will go to
the Speaker
himself.
So, although it is your decision that is being challenged,
yes,
that should go to the Speaker.
That was his advice to them. I read that. Right. So that is the way it ought to be. And I'm saying that ever since I've been a Deputy Speaker, no such formal application to challenge a Speaker's ruling has ever come to me. This, I'm saying that in this particular instance, the Speaker himself admitted that motion to raise an objection to the motion he had already called to be dealt with. Now, if the Speaker wanted to deal with it himself, why, he could have said, I'm deferring this one, defer every matter. But he left it to me with instructions. So I'm surprised that he's surprised.
So you were empowered to act, and of course with the full powers accorded to the Speaker in that moment, and you took that decision.
That's right.
But do you at least concede that in exercising your independence in interpreting the Constitution, understanding all this, that will definitely sometimes pitch you against the Speaker?
Pitch me against is my challenge. We may have different interpretation of the same rules.
That may lead to different outcomes.
Yes.
And those outcomes may the word is pitch, doesn't it?
No, it means that we have alternative views to the same issue. And I was emphatic that between the Speaker and myself, this is not new. Working at the Constitutional and Legal Committee, where he was chairman, I was ranking member, we took different views to the same clauses. It happens on so many occasions.
But that is fine so far as it's at the committee level. But here you are, the overlords of the House, disagreeing based on your interpretations of the Constitution, understanding on that, arriving at two different positions and outcomes.
Yes.
That definitely is a recipe for chaos.
I don't think so. I don't think so at all. It only emphasizes that in a democracy, different people think differently. And indeed, that's what it ought to be. If we all think the same thing, probably the Parliament will not be necessary.
Gridlock is the word that comes up. Doesn't that introduce that probability of this bringing gridlock?
No. You see, the matter that was dealt with on last Tuesday,
yes,
is gone. It can be resurrected. The application will be made to him. He can admit it. It will be re-argued. Right? Either way, whether it is reopened or it is rejected at the end, we would have made progress. But my emphasis is feeling offended that I don't think like him. That is where I say it's dangerous to democracy.
Why is that dangerous?
Why should I think like him?
You can defer because it was his original decision.
Why did he leave it to me then? You could have advised that deferred.
Would you have accepted that if he had told you to defer? Would you have?
Why not?
Why would you? Why would you in that instant? Because once you're acting, you are vested with all the powers of a speaker.
Yes, but we also defer to leadership. And if you recall, on the 7th, the issue relating to whether deputy leaders' motion should be moved before or after it had been seconded. I said openly, what I heard Mr. Speaker say is what I'll do. If he gives me specific instructions and I don't agree with it, I'll tell him. But once I accept to do it, I'll stick to it. But if I have a reason to disagree with him. And in our discussion, that happens all the time. Mr. Speaker, I don't agree with this one. I don't agree with that one. My challenge is coming out in the open and coming to chastise me because I disagree with him. For me, that is where the danger is.
To the substantive matter, you said, quote, I relied on Order 191 of the standing orders in coming to the decision I arrived at.
Yes.
In deciding to rule on the matter of the motion calling for a bipartisan probe into the COVID expenditure. Order 191 says, quote, the House may at any time by motion appoint special or ad hoc committee to investigate any matter of public importance, to consider any bill, emphasis on bill, that does not come under the jurisdiction of any of the standing or select committees. What was before you wasn't a bill, it was a motion.
Yes.
So, respectfully, 191 doesn't apply.
It does. You see, the two are in the same order. They are not in different order 1911 and order 192. No, they're all in one order, order 191. And so, which is not before any committee, applies to both.
But the word there was explicit. It says a bill. The two are different, are they not?
No. A matter of public interest or a bill, which is not a subject matter of any committee. So the last part relates to the two. It differentiates between a public interest and a bill, but the part relating to a subject matter
Of public importance.
Whatever, not a subject matter of a committee's work. For example, if you recall, I think there was an application like this, that the table fees or something, right? The motion was made, and the Speaker directed that, okay, they agreed at the leadership. Take it, set a committee, and they did a public hearing, right? All right. Now, because of the nature of it, it was not a public expenditure. It was a private event. And they said that they alleged that some people were charged money before they were put before. So public account does not come in because it's not public funds. The event itself was not public. So it was an allegation of a minister or somebody taking bribes, so to speak. So you cannot put it under any of the committee's work. Right. But when you say that funds that have been taken from either the budget or loans taking and expended by ministries, departments, and agencies, and have been, indeed, during the debate on the motion, the Minister for Parliamentary Affairs, or the Majority Leader, pointed out that these accounting have been done in the budget. He pointed them out in the budget annexes. Right. So technically, the issues you're asking for were actually within Parliament. The budget had been laid before Parliament. The accounting is contained in the budget. And there's a committee responsible for that. So I thought that Order 191 applied.
How is this different from the bipartisan committee that probed the Sputnik V vaccine acquisition, for example? There was you have a health committee that could have looked into that. But you agreed to have a bipartisan committee. Isn't this the same?
I don't know. I don't know how that came to be. Frankly, when I read the report of the committee, I was a bit surprised whether this is a health committee report or a special, because they don't make any recommendations. Probably, if it had been dealt with by a committee that had the experience.
Oh, they made a recommendation for the money to be recovered, which was recovered.
Hello. What recommended? What was it? What was the purpose of the committee? To retrieve money?
Fact finding. It was a fact finding.
What was the fact that was found?
Well, that monies have been paid.
The critical thing was that you are alleging misconduct on behalf of.
True.
So, what was the recommendation in respect of the alleged misconduct?
But fundamentally, that committee, just back to the question, is in the same as what was being requested. But in this case, your argument is that there's another committee in Parliament that should deal with it, and so we don't need a bipartisan committee. Yes. But in that case, That is
You
a
see,
contradiction in terms.
no, I've said that the accounting had already come to the House. What you're asking to do in public, it had already been done in place before the House in the budget. So what was it that you're going to ask again? In any case, the Public Accounts Committee sit in public. They don't, there's one of the few committees, the standing committees that sit in public. The Public Accounts Committee is chaired by the minority. So what is new? What is it that you're going to do just because we'll call it public committee? Sometimes I find it interesting the way we no, let me leave it
Is it your suggestion the Parliament is incapable or barred from setting up a bipartisan committee into a matter like this?
How? When there's a rule determining how it should be done. It's not bad.
So, so setting up a bipartisan committee into the COVID-19 expenditure isn't something that Parliament can't do.
What I'm suggesting is that what you're asking Parliament to do, Parliament already has a committee that does that. And the Parliament's, the accounting has already been put before Parliament. And so the committee is entitled to sit in public and ask any question. They can invite anybody to come and answer questions.
But why? So I get you. But why not the bipartisan committee?
Because it is duplicitous. The same members of Parliament. There's a committee that is responsible for doing this. It has the same structure and powers and character of what you want to be set up. Right? It has the same powers. Why should we set it up again?
Can I put it?
Argument, one of them was that they are busy.
Can I put it to you that really this is about covering the political tracks? That this, if that committee had been set up, it is immediate. It's not waiting on the Auditor General's report to come. It is immediate. And with all the climate that is happening right now, it is definitely not in the interest of the government and the party of which you belong. And so the decision then is taken to say, defer it till after the Auditor General has submitted his report on the matter, which could be a year or two into the future.
Well, that's your interpretation and very fertile young minds. But I pointed out at the time that the committee doesn't have to wait for any Auditor General's report. It has the power to call you, okay, you have brought the accounting. I want you to answer questions.
No, but the committee only works with, its work is triggered by the Auditor General's report.
Not only. It's a committee of Parliament. The Auditor General's report is one, but it can go out to investigate any matter.
The Public Accounts Committee is one of the few committees actually mentioned in the Constitution.
Yes.
And it's circumscribed.
It's not circumscribed. It has the power. Every committee of Parliament has the power to investigate any matter.
But there's a reason why a committee specifically mentioned the budget and not the Finance Committee, and not because of the nature of its work, that it has to do work on the Auditor General's report.
Yes. So it doesn't mean that it cannot do any other work.
Is there precedent to that the Public Accounts Committee by themselves sit and then call for a budget and brings the finance?
Not the budget, the accounting.
Yeah, but it was, in this case, it was accounted for in the budget.
Yes, it's an annex. The budget has been passed, right?
But an annex is the budget.
Yes. So those, if you have any questions whatsoever, you don't have to wait for the Auditor General to finish.
But I ask you, is there precedent to that?
No, I'm not aware of any precedent.
But
just the same thing as
daring like the challenge in your proposition.
Why? Why should that be a challenge? Has there ever been a precedent of a bipartisan committee to investigate any public expenditure?
There have been many bipartisan committees in the past.
To public expenditure in particular? None.
I mean, so you realistically expect that the Public Accounts Committee, you say, should sit on an appendix to the budget and invite the...
You can call it an appendix to the budget.
You call it an appendix, so I'm using
I said
the same
it
phrase.
is the accounting which has been made in the budget and is contained in the appendix.
You know, the minute they sit and attempt to invite the finance minister who put it there, their job will be challenged.
Why?
Because of the constitutional prescription.
And what is the constitutional prescription?
Which is what I put to you, that the Public Accounts Committee, as we've known it to do its job, has always sat over that.
What you know it to do is not the Constitution. The Constitution does not restrict it to reviewing only the public.
But there's a reason why they haven't done what you suggested before.
In
the history of since 1992, there's a reason why that hasn't happened before.
You see, when I announced publicly that I will vote, I'll leave the chair and vote, there's a reason, because that's never been done before. We have never had a closed parliament like that before. And I intended that this issue should come up so that we can take a final decision on it. If it has never been done before, and it is never done, it will never be done. So if it's not been done before, why not now?
I'm going to take a break. When I return, we will deal with the matter he just touched on about the decision to excuse himself to vote. Then before the break, let's find out question on this one. The speaker said also in that decision and calling you acting offensively, etc., that he will meet you later in chambers to try and resolve your differences. You heard him. Has that call been extended to you?
No. I was out of the country then. I came back the Friday when Parliament had closed. I actually arrived, I got home about 1. There was no point coming because I'll not meet Parliament in session. But I thought that even before we met, I should let my position be known.
Are you looking forward to sitting down with him to resolve this?
I don't have a problem at all. I have no challenge at all. Indeed. In the previous statement that he has made, we have discussed them. And I've pointed out where I disagree with him. I don't take those things personal. They are views, interpretations of other people's actions. So, yes, I responded this time because he has put one out in public, the second one, and the third one. I thought that if I do not respond, it will appear that I'm conceding that I'm what he says I am, when I'm not.
Is it your expectation that this meeting, if it that happened, should resolve this once and for all so this doesn't play out again in media?
As long as we accept that at any point in time, we are not expected to think and behave differently in the same manner, there should be no problem. And if he thinks I've erred, he can always point it out to me, though. The Deputy Speaker, I think this one, it should have been A, B, C, D, or E.
You want it done in private?
Maybe I would also say, yes. Maybe I would also tell him, no, this way I think he didn't consider A, Z, or Y before. Right? But you do one in public, I keep quiet. You do a second one in public, I keep quiet. You do a third one in public. I think it was time to respond.
If you almost suggest, if this happens again in public, you would exercise your right to respond again?
I hope it does not. I hope it does not happen again.
But if it does?
Well, we'll cross the bridge when we get there.
I want to take a break. When we return, I'll touch on a point he himself brought up, which is so outstanding. Can he, the first Deputy Speaker of Parliament, vote while presiding? Can he? He says he can. How? That is the matter that led to the brawl on the floor, call it violence, on the floor, the last time the e-levy came up. I'll get his thoughts on that. Has he shifted his position? Or does he still believe that's something that he's entitled to do? Stay with me on PM Express. And thank you for staying with us here on PM Express. There's still a few more controversial matters that we need to go through. The first, obviously, is Joe Osei Owusu has caused a bit of stir, as he himself cited. It's never happened before, and he attempted to do it. And as he himself possibly is guessing, because it hasn't happened before, he was the first to attempt to do it, he started a major fight on the floor, which is what? He attempted to vote whilst he was presiding. Mr. Owusu, so you attempted to vote while you were presiding, at least the position goes. The minority is vehemently opposed to that. The e-levy is still not resolved, and so possibly it might come back to that. because of the numbers. Have you shifted your position that you are entitled to?
No, I think that my position has been misrepresented.
Okay.
It is clear that you do not retain your original vote whilst on the seat. What I did on that day was that after the second deputy speaker had voted, I invited him to take the chair so I can leave the chair, derobe, and vote. In actual fact, all that happened, I did not see it because I had left the chamber. I saw a video of it. I had gone to derobe. I was coming out when I met the second deputy speaker. That's why I said, oh, there's chaos and violence in the chair, so every other thing. So the issue is that when I left the chair, then the minority members tried to prevent the second deputy speaker from taking the chair. So proceedings will continue. So my insistence is not to vote from the chair, but as and when necessary, I will leave the chair if I'm the one presiding, or the second deputy speaker presiding can leave the chair and change over so that he can also exercise his vote. And that I insist on it.
But you can't do that because the standing of the 113 on the process for a division is clear. At the time that you call for that voice vote and you, in your discretion, decides the voice vote is not enough to settle the matter, so let's move to a head count. At that time you make that call, you only made that call because you were not part of the voice vote, and so you needed clarity. How then do you become part post that in breaking the tie?
You see, if you go read the whole standing order, the part dealing with head count or division, it says that even a member who was not in the chamber,
true,
and who did not even hear the question put,
is entitled to vote.
Is entitled to vote.
Yes.
What about me? I'm a member. I heard the question because I was presided in vote. But when it comes to the head count, my right is not taken away.
But your position creates an absurdity, doesn't it?
How?
Because the whole idea of a division stems from a speaker's inability to rely on a voice vote to reach a conclusion.
Yeah.
So once you have presided over you call for the voice vote, now you are asking, in effect, to break the tie, to conclude, and you need a head count. Then that same speaker, having started the process and admitted that I cannot determine this because I've called for a vote, then now becomes...
It's not that the speaker does not determine. The speaker has actually determined it's aye or no. But it has been challenged.
Challenged, true.
Right.
True.
You know, so...
Then you now become the tiebreaker. After you have presided over that...
You can call it a tiebreaker.
In this instance, it is.
I become a member of the House once I leave the seat.
But you admit that at least the fairness in interpreting the rules, that makes it absurd.
No, it doesn't. If you go through the standing orders, you find that at committees, it says that the presiding chairman does not vote unless there's a tie. And when there's a tie, the chairman has a casting vote. All right? He is the chairman, he's presiding, he puts a question. But it is intended that when there's a tie, the chairman will cast a vote. If you read carefully the constitutional provision and the standing orders, it says he does not retain his original vote. What happens to the casting vote? Does that not suggest something? So the original vote was not exercised, but I can get down when we are doing the other one and vote.
When you've begun the process?
Yes. The last part, in 2021, when we were voting on the budget, Right Honorable Speaker was here, but I was presiding. When it got to the head count, he quickly came in and relieved me, and I joined the ranks and voted.
Had you started the?
Yes.
Have you put the question already?
I don't remember exactly whether I put the question or not, but we had just gotten to the point where we're coming to count heads.
But that's an important variable in deciding whether your position is actually supported. Because if you had actually put the question, as you did in the previous case, you put the question, the yes or nay wasn't settled, it's challenged, and then now you go in. That definitely creates a problem.
It doesn't, and it shouldn't. The first thing is that, as a member of parliament representing a constituency, unless I choose not to vote, my vote should never be constrained in any way. The people I represent are entitled to be heard. And if, because I take on an additional responsibility of presiding, and there's a decision which my people's voice must be heard, why shouldn't the two of us, the deputies, one vote, the other takes over? And this is happening, remember, this is happening because the speaker, who is not a member of, is not available in the chair.
Yes.
And so, now, we are forced to assume a responsibility which ordinarily we should not. At that point, that our votes are required. So, what happens is in particular case, for example, then the House can never take a decision on any matter in which there's no consensus.
Yes.
That would defeat democracy.
Democracy
is that either reach a consensus or the majority wins.
But that's not actually accurate, because the Constitution says, in your case, there would have been a tie and the vote is lost. That's a decision.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a decision. That's what the Constitution. That's a constitutional prescription.
Well, so let me put it this way: then government can never do anything, cannot have a decision on any matter in which.
But if that's what the Constitution says, that is what it is.
And so that is why the member's vote should never be constrained, because he assumes an additional responsibility.
You can see that your position, as we saw, triggered violence.
It shouldn't. I mean, I am
that was
disappointed that the media, the speaker himself, do not condemn the violence. It triggered violence. Why should that be?
The speaker had called, had to chastise the entire House recently.
Why the entire House? Was the violence caused by the entire House?
But it was Parliament.
I think that we should call people by name and their behavior. Otherwise, there's a group description and the real culprits get away.
You can bring a motion for that to happen.
No.
You are the chairman of the Privileges Committee.
Yes.
What have you done about this?
I don't have.
This is your domain.
No, I don't have the power to do anything unless it's referred to my committee.
But but somebody must first move this.
Nobody has moved it.
You can move it.
When I'm the one who is going to preside?
No. The same way you say that you can vote, nothing stops you from moving it.
And then go back and preside. I'll be prosecuting and presiding.
It is the same matter in the current instance.
No, it doesn't.
You move the question, and then you go and vote to break the tie. The same thing. It's the same principle.
Whether I move the question or not, I'm entitled to vote.
Yeah, whether you move the motion to punish an MP or not, you're entitled to be the chairman of the Privileges Committee.
No, because I've been prejudiced. I'm the one saying this person has erred. Then I have to go and sit down as a judge without bias against anybody.
You can recuse yourself.
Then who does? This is one of the things happened when I and some members were accused of taking bribes. I thought that it was not fair for me to continue to preside on the appointments committee. So I called leader. Well, in view of this allegation, do you think I should continue? I think that I should step down. So we all went through the proceedings carefully and find out the rule is very clear. Appointments committee presided by the first deputy speaker. So it was not possible to replace you with anything else. So you don't have a choice. So we have to. And I announced it publicly. But the truth is, there are certain things, it is prescribed by law. You can do it. But when it calls for, when it is interpretation, but my training as a lawyer and as a judge, it would be inappropriate for me
you to do that.
To make an accusation.
However, you've said that it's clear the side of the House that the speaker should have directed his criticism at.
Yes.
And I guess you're saying is the minority side.
Yes.
So the majority side can bring a motion. Your side have not brought a motion still.
Well, I'm saying that.
If you're interested in sanctioning people
in the media, group all of us together as if all of us.
Yeah, but we are entitled to do so.
No, you're entitled to point out those who were in
so when Parliament itself, and in this case a majority, had neglected to use the processes to isolate people who were responsible and sanction them, you cannot blame the media.
I recall that the Honorable Deputy Majority Leader mentioned names.
Yeah, but that's not a process in Parliament for formally getting somebody referred to your committee.
I did not talk about even reprimand. I'm saying condemn. You say, oh, violence broke out. Or you don't condemn violence.
But that's not enough.
The real point I want to make is that why should disagreement on how the law should be become violent? In a democracy, why should that be the case? It has never happened. This parliament is unique in the sense that we have thrown away every value that has built a parliament since 2000.
But you know why
since
that is
1993.
You know why that's the case?
No.
Because impunity is allowed to reign in the floor of parliament.
Right. Not just being arraigned. Generally, the country, impunity is growing, but even here on the floor of the House. But that's the point I'm making.
Because we
even condemning people for what they have done.
I put it to you, condemning on the floor of parliament when the standing of this in the constitution is clear on what to do. Allegations were made of people bringing sharp objects that day, injuring some of your colleagues, bloody, and Parliament has not done a thing about it.
Exactly.
Nobody has been held
responsible.
But you, as a leader of the House,
no,
you
because
cannot complain.
I have to complain. I'm kept to complain because we keep using that as a reference when violence broke out without condemning what happened. And here I'm referring to Mr. Speaker, because he made a reference to that and said that it's because of what I did that led to violence. At that time, I didn't hear him condemn the violence. And I thought that was inappropriate. However I behaved, there's a procedure for dealing with anything. Yeah. So if I did anything wrong, use the procedure. Yeah. But should never resort to violence. And then I'm talking about the media because we keep repeating it as if what happened, the violence is not untoward.
But at least, do you at least expect, as a leader and a first deputy speaker, accept responsibility on behalf of this great house that Parliament itself hasn't done enough to sanction people instead of an example, instead of a deterrent for future?
I agree with you entirely. It's not just this misbehavior.
There was a 7th of January one, that nothing has happened. Then there was this. There was a one on the budget. Nothing has happened. So the next one, when you try to vote again because you believe you should, it will happen again because Parliament has refused, willfully so, blind, to deal with your own inner house.
To a large extent, I agree that the inability of Parliament to deal with the indiscipline of people introducing violence into the House, using foul language, attacking one another on the floor of the House is a major setback.
What will you do about it as a leader?
Well, I can only comment on it at a leadership meeting. I can only comment on it at a leadership meeting.
Only comment? But you admit that's not enough.
No, wait, I'm saying that because I have the person...
That it may eventually come before you.
That's right. So I'm very careful what I say in public. But when we're at a leadership forum, then I can say everything that we have to say. And even my choice of words can be as blunt as possible.
Talking about Privileges Committee, there's a constitutional provision that's come up for a lot of analysis recently. The constitutional provision that talks about how a member of parliament can vacate their seat. One of the provisions talks about if he or she is absent without permission for 15 sittings and unable to offer a reasonable explanation to your committee, the person vacates the seat. It's come up that it's turning out some members of parliament, mainly from your side, have been absent 15 sittings and more, and nothing has happened. Why is that?
I think that the real issue is who triggers the process and who is keenly interested in triggering the process, right? I recall that in the second parliament, the group called the RICRO did something like that. Yes. But I think in the counting, they made errors in counting people. You were absent today, you came the following day, then the next day you didn't come. But if you read that, there should be 15 sitting days continuous. So when it was forwarded to Mr. Speaker, the Speaker took no action in respect of them. But I think the appropriate thing for a person interested to raise the matter on the floor of the House, that such a member has been absent without permission, and maybe refer to the votes and proceedings to show that on this day you was absent, you count 15 sitting days continuously. And then the Speaker if satisfied that indeed the current number has actually been met, that the person is absent for that number of period, may refer to the Privileges Committee for the person to go and offer an explanation why he should not be, he should not vacate the seat.
Something again happened on the floor, and the Speaker again, an unprecedented action indeed. He declared, in reacting to a social media comment about him having granted Adjo Asafo's Dom Kwabenya MP permission to be absent, went on to say categorically that the voting proceedings are clear that Sarah Adjo Asafo has been absent for more than 15 sittings without his permission. First of all, what's your comment on that?
Well, if his observation is correct, that is what it is. I haven't counted, and so I cannot confirm or deny. But if his observation is correct, that is it. But then, who must trigger the process? Is it Mr. Speaker himself?
Can he?
Is it a member? I'm not too sure about that. I'm not too sure. So, it's a system which, because it's new, in the past people had not paid attention to that.
The numbers are exposing you
That's
now.
right. Now, people are being noticed. Absence are, I mean, people who are absent.
You can't hide anymore.
That's right. You know, when over 100 is, we could always go ahead and do anything. So even if you are not present, you may not be noticed. But now, every single member who is not present can be noticed, right? So, should Mr. Speaker just trigger the process, or should somebody bring it to his notice before it takes? I think these are matters.
But he has judicial notice now, I mean, if I can use that term. He has said it on the floor in his chair that a member of parliament has been absent for that long. Shouldn't he then have the responsibility to trigger it?
I'm not sure. I'm clearly not sure whether that should be the process. And I think that some of the things that are happening now, because of the nature of this parliament, would also give us an opportunity to clarify and clearly provide for. I've looked at the standing order since these discussions came. I've not really seen the process, a clearly defined process or procedure. I think last Friday, one of the former MPs called me that he's going on radio to discuss this thing, and we discussed these matters. And I think at that point, I consider that there's no clearly defined process for dealing with it. But I think the best thing is to test it.
Okay.
For a member or another to bring the matter to the attention of the Speaker and request that the person's conduct be referred to the Privileges Committee to...
I mean, on that same point, though, referring back to the Speaker's decision to go public with this thing, Adjo Asafo, there's a lot has been said about your colleague. And the Speaker himself had taken to the chair and said what he had said. Is her absence really a matter of concern to the majority side?
The issue is whether she's entitled to be absent for that length of period. And if she's not entitled, what should be the consequence? As to the effect or otherwise to the side, I think it should be obvious that beyond being part of the group, you represent the people. Should those people, those constituents be left without representation for that length of time? Unless there's a justification for doing that. I think that should be the question.
When you ask that question, what conclusion do you come to?
Well, I think that I'm not entitled to make a comment, because if her conduct should be referred to the Privileges Committee, I'm required by law to chair, and my comments may be prejudicial. So I'll raise the questions that I'll know if I...
You've had a concern of some of your members, kind of Japan, Bearfee and co. At least you sympathize with their concern.
I agree with the observations they have made, that the fact that the honourable member has been absent been absent for 15 sitting days or more. Whether she has sought permission or not, I cannot tell. Whether she has a good ground or not, I cannot tell. If indeed her conduct is brought to the committee, it is that exercise that will be required to go into. Did she have permission? Was she having a challenge which was disabling her from coming or even seeking permission? Those are the matters the committee will be...
I mean, a bad whisper to me that she actually applied for an extension to the Speaker's office. You may have been the acting Speaker then.
No, no, I'm not aware of any such. In the last parliament, application for leave to be absent was handled by me. But in this parliament, that assignment has not been given to me.
So you're not aware, it hasn't come to attention that she had specifically asked yourself
No, I'm
or
not.
the speaker to be absent?
No.
I mean, the speaker has stated that he didn't. And you also haven't granted?
No, I don't have any such application.
And
if she applied, it won't come to me.
Go to the speaker?
No, it may go to the second deputy speaker.
Okay. So it's possible that the second deputy, your deputy, the deputy to yourself, may have considered that?
I don't know. I don't want to hazard a guess.
Okay.
Just.
But I'm grateful, sir. Joe Osei Owusu, as honest as always, but you see his legal skills. You wonder sometimes why he's not on the bench and he's in the chair.
Actually, probably that's where I should have. You know, in 2007, one of our senior colleagues asked me, Joe, this job, at a point, you either go to the bench or you do politics. At this point, I think at that time I'd done 12 years or so at the bar. I think you should make a decision where to go, and you should go while you still have the strength to make a difference. And exactly, so I had made a choice.
Okay.
One that I've offered to do politics, I've lost. But when I was growing up, one of my dreams was to become a judge.
Ah.
Indeed.
Now abandoned?
Abandoned.
Okay.
In 1996, before the MP I replaced came, he approached me. He said, Gojo, our sitting MP is extremely unpopular. I want to contest, but I'll ask you, if you will contest, then I won't contest. He said, oh, okay, I'll support you. I still haven't made up my mind whether I want to go to the bench or want to do politics, so I'll support you. And that's why I became a party chairman, in order to put all the resources and skills available to support him. So at that point, I made a decision to do politics rather than to go to the bench.
Well, we wish you well.
Thank you so much.
Joe Osei Owusu is the first deputy speaker of parliament. Enjoy the rest of your evening.